Hey everybody, this is Vanessa from Lella Boutique. I'm taking over the Fat Quarter Shop YouTube channel today. I'm bringing you a tutorial for my Lovey Dovey quilt. It is more of an intermediate skill level. We're gonna use beginner piecing techniques like half square triangles and easy corner triangles, but you have to keep in mind there are a lot of pieces to this and some of them are really small. So the key to this quilt pattern is in a couple different things. One of them is that organization is absolutely important. One of the tools that I use is the Alphabitties. I used the regular packs and then also the expansion packs. There are that many pieces. And then the other thing that's going to be super important for this is trimming up each little segment as you go. It's a 20-inch finished block and it uses the Love Note fabric collection, which will be arriving to shops in November. Okay, before we begin, just a quick word about cutting. You're going to be selecting 16 fat quarters for this block. You can see that there are 16 heart blocks surrounding the dove. Each of the prints is represented, so you'll want to make sure and get a variety of print densities and colors. Also, from the excess of these fat quarter prints, you're going to be cutting out the center squares for your Sawtooth stars, the stripe sets that go in this wing here, the eye, and the beak. Now, you're also going to need 1 fat eighth for this accent wing section here. Please note that I did use the Alcott text print from Love Note. It's a unidirectional print. You're gonna actually be cutting 9 squares from your fat eighth so that you can make sure and cut that and have it facing upright. Now, for this tutorial, we're gonna start in order of the pattern instructions, which means we're gonna start out by making our heart blocks. All right, I have all of my pieces laid out. You're gonna wanna keep in mind that the heart-shaped rectangles are gonna be running vertically like this, so that if you're cutting a unidirectional print, just pay attention to that. So what I like to do is I like to face 2 of them out side by side, so then I can add the first easy corner triangles. So these are the H squares, and you're gonna line them up along the raw edges at the bottom here. Now, you're gonna wanna make sure that the marked lines are oriented to mirror each other like this. You can already kind of see how this is gonna become a heart shape. Then you're gonna take a couple K squares and you're gonna do the same thing. You're gonna have these mirror each other like that. And then all you need to do is stitch right on top of this line, which gives us these prints right here. Normally you're gonna be trimming 1/4 inch off here and then pressing this out. I like to press it first just because before you trim it, you can see exactly where it needs to line up so that it's gonna keep that perfectly 90-degree angle. So I would go ahead and press these out with an iron. And then from there, you're actually gonna be adding the adjacent squares to mirror each other. You'll be sewing along those lines and press those out. Then once those are finished, and granted, I will trim that off first, then you're gonna just take those 2 and you're gonna put them right sides together, and you can kind of make sure that those seams are gonna line up exactly, and then you can pin them and then just sew a 1/4 inch seam, and then you end up with this cute little heart block. These are supposed to finish at 4.5 inches unfinished. It's super important that you take the time to trim them, even if it's just a tiny bit, because later we're gonna be sewing these into columns, and these are gonna need to be able to fit exactly with your dove block. And I know from personal experience, if you don't trim, they're gonna end up being too long, and then you're gonna have to pick out the stitches and trim them a little bit. So definitely take the time to trim those blocks. Okay, now that the hearts are finished, we're ready to dive into the dove block. As you can see here, I have the finished dove block here, and then I have it broken up into its components. So the first part in the pattern that we're gonna work on is the Sawtooth stars. So the first thing that we're gonna do here is we're gonna make some flying geese. If you're unfamiliar with this, we're basically, again, gonna sew some easy corner triangles. We're gonna take our background square and we're gonna add it to the left side of the rectangle. We're gonna make sure all the raw edges are aligned. Sew right on top of that line. And then again, we're gonna press that open, and you can see I've trimmed a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then from there, we're just going to repeat, and we're going to add another square this time aligned with this side. Sew along the marked line and then press that open, and then you'll repeat and make 4 of those segments. From there, as you can see over here, you're gonna plug that in around your center square here and then your blue background squares. Sew that into rows, and then you'll sew the rows together. So once that little sawtooth star is done, you can see that we're gonna plug it in right here. From there, you're gonna add these Z rectangles to the sides and press out. And then you'll add the X rectangles to the top and bottom, and you'll press those out. And then in the pattern, that should measure 5.5 inches unfinished, so make sure you check that and trim it up if necessary. Now that the sawtooth star section is complete, we're gonna move on to this striped wing part here. So what we have now, these 3 are L rectangles. This I one is slightly wider, so make sure you pay attention to the order that you're placing them. The widest one needs to be on the bottom. Then we have our D strips here. You're gonna sew those all together in a column. Because we're working with such tiny pieces, the pressing is important. So what I did is I sewed the first 2 together, the 3rd and the 4th together, the 5th and the 6th together. And when I did so, I like to kind of finger press it open before I actually take it over to the iron. This just helps make sure that it stays straight. So then once you have those sections all together, you're gonna sew those together to complete the column. So this is what it looks like when it's all finished. And at this point, you definitely wanna go over and trim it again. This should be 4.5 inches unfinished. If you don't trim it, that's gonna cause some problems later, because we are gonna next add this blue square. We're gonna make sure we orient the marked line like this, stitch right on top of that line, and then press it open. What that's gonna look like is this. So that will go right here. From there, you're gonna sew the Y rectangle to the side and press, and you're gonna press out in this direction. Then we're gonna start working on this little bottom tail unit here. It's basically half of a flying geese unit like we were making earlier. You're gonna take this BB square, mark a diagonal line, sew on it, and then press it over. And then you're just gonna set it here right below. You're gonna sew the Z rectangle to the side of it. And then once that is all sewn together, you can sew this unit to this unit here, as you see right here. And at this point, you can actually sew the sawtooth star on top of this section as well. And then we can move on to the next part of the bird. Next, we're gonna move to the dove body section, which is this unit right here. You're just gonna take the G square from the pattern. You're gonna add the blue V square. You're gonna mark your diagonal line and make sure it's oriented like so. Make sure it's aligned with those raw edges. Then sew right on top of that line, press it, and trim the 1/4 inch seam allowance to give you the dove body like so. Then from there, these are gonna be cut as triangles. You're just gonna sew the F and the Q triangles together to get that part there. You will want to make sure and trim that up. It should measure 3.5 inches unfinished. This one you will want to trim as well, but it should be 5.5 inches square. So from there, we're gonna start working on the dove head. This is where it gets to be trickier because they're little teeny pieces. The I is 3/4 inch square. We have the O on top that we'll add in a minute, but then we have the P square. We have this little section here. You're just gonna sew the square on top of the unit here, and then the M rectangle. This one is sewn. We're gonna sew them together into a row and press, and I pressed out. And then you'll add the top unit, which you can see right here. Again, you want to make sure to kind of finger press these smaller pieces out just to make sure it lays as flat as possible. And then from there, you have to be really careful. We're gonna be adding another easy corner triangle by placing a square up in this corner, and the diagonal line is gonna go this way. So make sure you stitch along there. And then what that looks like is this unit right here. So you don't wanna be going in autopilot mode and add it to the wrong side, or when you get down the road to line up your beak, you're gonna realize you did the wrong one, which I have done. So pay extra attention there. Once again, make sure this is trimmed up. So once that is complete, you're gonna sew the W rectangle to the top of it like that. Then you're gonna be able to sew the triangle unit next to it. Then from there, you'll be able to sew this whole unit on top of the dove body. We're gonna start with a blue U rectangle, and then we should have some E beak prints cut. It's a little teeny square. You're just gonna sew right along that diagonal and flip it out. Super quick and easy. And then when you bring it back, it's gonna be positioned over here. First though, you'll need to sew another W rectangle to the top. Once that is sewn, you can stitch this unit to this entire unit. After this section is sewn together, you're gonna add the T rectangle to the top. And at that point, it should measure 7.5 inches by 10.5 inches unfinished. From there, we are super close to being finished because you'll be able to sew this entire section to this entire section. After you press, you add one rectangle from the bottom, and then you're left with this block right here, which unfinished should measure 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Now we're ready to frame this dove block with the hearts. You can place all of your individual hearts all around and mix them around until you find the exact order that you like. Once you have done that, you're gonna sew 2 columns of 3 for the sides, and then 2 rows of 5 for the top and bottom. You'll sew the sides first, and I like to press towards the center, and then you'll add the top and the bottom row, and you'll also press toward the center. At this point, the block is gonna be 20.5 inches by 20.5 inches, and you will make 9 of them. Now that you've completed all 9 blocks, you're gonna set it in this layout you see behind me. You're gonna use sashing, cornerstones. Once all of that is sewn together, the finished quilt is 72.5 inches by 72.5 inches. I hope you've enjoyed following along and making this quilt block with me. You can check out all my other quilt patterns and designs at lellaboutique.com or blog.lellaboutique.com. If you want to learn how to quilt this at home, make sure you follow my other YouTube video with Fat Quarter Shop on free motion quilting with flowers.